then we send you in the room and it has that much fluid in it, could you calculate how long you thought that beaker was in the room based on the results of the previous experiment? So yes, right, exactly. So yeah, I did that in your head. I had to like draw it out. So yes. So yes, it sat there 4 weeks. So we could calculate, essentially we could figure out how long that beaker, right, that beaker had been sitting in the room based on our previous experiment. Okay, so that makes sense. That's a scientific way to approach it. However, let me point out a couple things here, is that we made some assumptions in that experiment. So the assumption was that the room that it was in had the same humidity level all the time. So if it was like really humid when we did the experiments and then it was really dry here, it would probably evaporate a lot faster. What if there was like a fan blowing in the room when this particular cylinder was in there, so it would cause it to evaporate faster than what our experiment was? Other things like the detergent that was used to wash the cylinder could actually affect how quickly the fluid would evaporate out of it. So these are all other parameters that might affect the result of the experiment. So if the experiment was done properly, they would determine what are all the important variables and they would control them. So the experiment would be done in a room that was humidity controlled, and they would make sure that the airflow was constant, and they would make sure that however the cylinders were washed, that they would be washed the same way and the fluid was the same. So they would make sure that they would find out what all the variables are and they would control them. And then if this beaker or this cylinder was in the same controlled environment, then we could be confident that yes, it was 4 weeks ago that the cylinder was put there. Before that, we wouldn't know. So I just point that out to, there are assumptions that are made. It seems to make sense. Hey, 4 weeks, it seems to make sense. But there are things, and in the case of this experiment, you could control all of those things. So you could actually do that and control it because they're within your time period, the lifetime and everything. Well, carbon-14 is not. So let's take a look. So I have to do a little bit of chemistry here. Sorry about that, but so just a little bit though. We'll see how the beaker experiment applies here in a minute. So this is a diagram of a carbon atom. This is carbon 12. So what makes it a carbon? So if you remember from science or chemistry class, so atoms have protons and neutrons in the middle, and they have electrons that orbit around it. It's like the planets. So, and what makes this a carbon atom is it has 6 protons. So every atom that has 6 protons is a carbon atom. Every atom that has 7 protons is a nitrogen atom, and so on. Every that has 1 is a hydrogen atom. So that's what this elemental chart is. So you'll see here, zoom in, here you'll see carbon is 7. You can't see it there. So anyway, on the top here. So 2E. Sorry. So that's what makes an atom. Now, atoms have what are called, I don't know if you've ever heard of a term called isotopes, but all carbon atoms have 6 protons, but they don't all have necessarily the same number of neutrons or electrons. That might get mixed up. And so while they all have 6 protons, they might have a different number of neutrons or electrons, and that makes them isotopes. So this is a C12 atom pictured here because it has 6 protons and 6 neutrons in its nucleus. That makes it a C12. So there's 2 other common carbon isotopes. There's C13 and C14. So C12 is on the left there. So you see it's the diagram a little different. Thanks to Answers in Genesis, by the way, for these little diagrams. So the one on the left, there's 12 protons and 12 neutrons. The one in the middle, C13, is 12 protons or 6 protons and 7 neutrons, which means it adds up to 13. So that's why it's called C13. And it's also stable. So it will stay in that state. It won't unless some extreme force acts on it to change it into something, either a chemical or an electrical force. And then the one on the right is C14. It still has 6 protons, which makes it carbon, but it has 8 neutrons, and that's unstable. So just think about it. When something's unstable, it's like you try to take 2 magnets and put the same poles together. It wants to push itself apart. So it's unstable, whereas the other 2, the poles are all lined up, so it'll stay together. And unless something acts on it, it's never going to come apart. So it's a little more complex than that, but that's so that makes it unstable. So in a sense, C14 over time will evaporate. In the beaker terminology, it's going to disappear. It actually will turn into a nitrogen. So, but it will disappear over time. So C12 and C13, they stay the same. C14 is unstable, it's radioactive, so it will over time deteriorate. So the reason this matters is that carbon, so C12 and C14, both combine in our atmosphere to create carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide, the plants breathe in. Here. And again, thanks to Answers to Genesis for these diagrams. And then, so the plants breathe them in, and then they breathe in the carbon dioxide, and then they put the oxygen out, and the carbon stays in the plant. And then the animals eat the plants, or some people eat plants, and then people eat animals, or animals eat them. So everything, so essentially everything that's alive eats plants, either directly or secondarily. So we have the same amount when we die, we stop taking in carbon. Okay, so our beaker's full. At the time that we die, our beaker is full. All right. And then as we die, then the C14 that's in us begins to deteriorate, evaporate. So as we die, the amount of C12 stays the same, and the C14 drops over time. Okay, so that's just like the beaker, it's evaporating. So science says that it takes, so have you ever heard the term half-life?
Scientists.
Yeah, scientists say this. Have you ever so half-life, what half-life means is the amount of time that it takes for half of the element to disappear. So for carbon-14, if you have 1 billion carbon-14 atoms in the half-life, half of them, you'll have half a billion. So, and then another half-life, you'll have 250 million, and then on down. So
5700.
Yes, so that's right. So the half-life of C14 has been calculated to be 5,730 years. So who sees a hole in that? It could be right, but to make that as an actual, we know this definitively.
Someone has to live.
Can anyone see a reason why that's suspicious? Yes, someone would have to be alive back then.
How can it be observational if no one's there to observe it?
Now, it doesn't mean that that's not correct, because you can, test for part of it, and then so we only tested in the beaker test. We only did 3 weeks of test, but then we were able to use it for 4 weeks. So we could go back further than we actually did tests on, assuming everything else was constant. So just because we can't observe it doesn't mean it's wrong, but we certainly then shouldn't accept it as scientific fact. It should at least be, okay, little asterisk, assuming that this is correct. Now, carbon-14 dating is a relatively short-term dating method. It can only be used to date stuff 50 to 60,000 years old. There are other radiometric dating methods, like with uranium and argon and such, that can be used for much longer distances because they have a greater half-life. But it's the same basic principle. So again, if the 5,730 years is correct, that it takes that long, and if we know how much C14 was in the organic piece of matter, a bone or whatever, when it died, then we can calculate how long ago it died. I mean, that makes sense, right? You can see how it's like the beaker thing. But there's a lot of problems in that. There's a lot of assumptions that are made. First and foremost, that the half-life is at 5,730 years, and that it has always been that. It might be that now, but it doesn't mean that it has always in the past been that.
As scientists also admit, there's been climate change.
Yes. So
the environment in the room has changed. Remember, we talked about having a constant state of humidity or not, regulate. Scientists says it's changed. I mean, that's the big five right now. Go hug a tree. Yep. Climate's changing. So how could the constant be 5,730 years?
Yes. So there's some other things. So C14, it would seem like after long enough, there would be no more C14 left, because if it all deteriorates, then it's gone. So, but that's not true, because What makes C14? Well, the main thing that makes C14 in the atmosphere is cosmic rays from our sun. So the sun is constantly making more C14. And so scientists can measure the ratio between C12 and C14 in the atmosphere now, and they can use that to do their calculations when they find dead stuff. But the problem is that the cosmic rays are affected by many things: atmospheric conditions, the Earth's magnetic field either makes cosmic rays more or less potent in our atmosphere. The sun itself has oscillates. Sometimes it sends out more cosmic rays than at other times, and these cycles are big cycles too. So we don't know what it was. Nobody was measuring cosmic rays 1,000 years ago. They didn't even know they existed.
So in the beaker example, someone's coming in and pouring some extra stuff in there.
Or they're adding humidity in the room or whatever. Right,
Yeah.
Exactly, yes. Yep. There's other energetic events such as comet or asteroid impacts that could have drastically changed the ratio of C12 to C14 in the past. And we would have no way to monitor or measure that. And then biblically, we have no idea what the atmosphere was like before the flood. It certainly was different than it is now. So to use carbon-14, well, so these are all reasons to have doubt as to the method of carbon-14 dating. And while the reasons are different, all radiometric dating methods have similar reasons to cause doubt that, hey, there are assumptions you have to make to be able to say, I definitively know this is X years old because of this method. And one of the main ones is you weren't there. I wasn't there. You can't say that. You don't know that. It is a theory.
I know who was there.
Yes. Yes. Another thing, real quick, is that they've discovered things in the earth that are far older than any carbon-14 should ever exist. Like, for example, diamonds. Diamonds are supposed to be millions of years old, and yet they have carbon-14, relatively high levels of carbon-14 in them. And diamonds, so some make the defense of, oh, well, any carbon-14 you find in something is because it's just been exposed to the atmosphere today, and so it leaches in. But that don't happen with diamonds. Diamonds do not. They're impervious to that kind of thing. So there's an example that's like, that doesn't make sense. How can there be carbon-14 and this is carbon-14 should be essentially completely gone after about 100,000 years. There should be essentially no detectable amounts.
So the scientific claim that it's millions of years old and their scientific claim about C14, they're not compatible.
Right. So does that give us conclusive scientific evidence to say, no, you're all wrong? No, but it certainly should make them take a step back and say, you're right. We're just making theories here. And why do they make these theories? Because they have biases. They think that things are millions and billions of years old. There are cases, so Brian mentioned the rock strata. So geologists, that's one of the major dating methods that's used also, aside from radiometric dating, is the rock strata that they discover stuff in. They assume it's here in this rock strata. This rock strata is such and such deep. That means it's such and such age. So but very commonly they discover when they do radiometric dating on these things that the two don't go together, that they give drastically different ages. But they will generally give precedence to the stratification date over the radiometric date. So they'll essentially say, okay, because we found it in this strata, we're going to say it's this old, even if radiometric dating says something else. So we should be careful. It's hard not to kind of laugh at that. And they say it's like, we know this is true. They don't know it. They don't know it. They believe it. They want to believe it, but they don't know it. It is not scientific. They're basing their conclusions on complete fabrications and theories of which they cannot prove.
I have not seen such faith in all of Israel.
Yes.
The faith they exhibit is amazing.
So science is good. Scientists can be questionable on both sides. So those scientists who claim to be Christians, and especially scientists who are attempting to give evidence for biblical truths through the scientific method, should always be careful and open and honest and transparent in these things.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me reiterate here. like we were mentioning yesterday, if we're talking about here, our faith and science incompatible, and I mentioned there are scientific laws, known operational science, where they go through like the Uri Miller experiments, where they try to create life from non-life. They know they cannot do that. It's a scientific law of biogenesis. Life must come from life. There is no abiogenesis, meaning life can't come from non-life. They know that scientifically, and that works on our side. That is compatible with our faith, because it had to come from something that is life and has always been. So that law of science works for us. The law of thermodynamics works for us. The laws of cause and effect work for us. There has to be a first cause. Science, true scientific laws bolster. They stand with evidence. They stand as one with the word. So don't let people try to hoodwink you any other way with it.
Yes.
Like grass and trees, it started out as live.
Yes, right. So the tree was always alive. Yes, right. Yes.
Mhm.
They changed it and made a different tree.
Right. Yes, excellent example. It's always from life. Even that experiment Brian referred to, initially they released results. Oh yeah, we created life, because they put chemicals in there and they put electrical charges. They said they recreated the atmosphere as it was 4.5 billion years ago on the Earth. And look, at life came out, but then, and they believed that for like a couple decades. And then they discovered, oh no, wait, we didn't wash it well, and there was some bacteria inside of the beakers that they were using, and that's what was alive. It was life already.
Mm-hmm.
So if you run across something where people say, hey, they proved it back in the 50s that life can be created out of nothing. No, they didn't. They thought they did, but it's been completely disproved. They admit it, right?
They admit it.
Yeah. It's not
Not just a
disputed.
conspiracy theory,
Yes.
some internet.
Yes.
No, they know they cannot create life from non-life.
So I'm not going to get anywhere near the detail. I just want to give a couple more examples of things where scientists present things as scientific of evidence of scientific fact when they're just filled with assumption. So let's just, but I'm not going to get into the details. I think we'll see though these here. So here, for example, this slide just tells you what I said.
Yeah.
This here, this picture. So these are little T-Rex. Oh, so see, there's even debate, because if you notice the one on the right, the eye socket hole is different shape. So they think the T-Rexes had bigger eyes. He looks a little cute, that one guy. So, but so looking at this, looking at the skull, and then thinking, yeah, that kind of makes sense. You can see how they kind of fleshed it out and stuff. It's sort of okay. I mean, they didn't have a T-Rex to go on. So this here, for those who aren't geeks and don't already know this, can anybody guess what this skull is? See, somebody's a geek and already knows.
Saber-tooth tiger?
I can see how you would think that. I mean, it was teeth and stuff, yeah.
Any other guesses?
Any other?
What?
Okay, yeah, so people, yes, that is a
Hippo?
hippo. So people know. That's good, though, but you would never see a hippo in this. You know that's a hippo skull. Well, I'm asking. So those who knew it was a hippo, how do you know it was a hippo?
Where its eyes are located, Sam says. The teeth, Tara says, right? Someone understand that? The tusk.
Well, some of you are better than me, because I never would have for a second. I mean, that you have to fill in a whole lot more flesh on that to become a hippopotamus than you do on that. I mean, that's a modern day hippopotamus. It isn't an ancient prehistoric animal. So I mean, that Brian showed one before with the elephant. Again, it's the same thing. How would you ever get the ears? So to think somehow that they claim, and scientists put forth the idea that, we know this is what a T-Rex looked like. How do they even know the color? It's much less who knows what it looked like? Who knows how it was fleshed out? It might have had cartilage horns and stuff that aren't there, or big floppy elephant ears, or we don't know. I mean, but they don't even allow that discussion, because they just present this as evidence for scientific fact.
It's like when they found that tooth and built the whole person around it.
Yes, yep.
And even his wife too. That was the amazing part. They had one tooth and they made Nebraska Man, put him Nebraska Man on display, and created his wife, and all from one tooth that belonged to a pig.
Yep. So here's another example. This is of evolution here. That's not it.
That's not evolution.
So here's Darwin with his experiments on the Galapagos Islands, where he observed that different finches on the island had different shaped beaks that seemed to be ideally shaped for the trees that they lived in and the nuts and berries that they ate. So you'll see they're different shaped beaks. And so the Galapagos Islands have a pretty wide range of environments. So there were different types of trees on it. And so these are, but they're all finches. They just have, this is what we call adaptation. Or
What you're showing your age. When we were in school, younger generation.
that old.
I'm not saying you went to school with Charles, but when we were in school, it was called adaptation. These days, it's called microevolution. Microevolution is what we knew as adaptation. It's variations within a species, whereas macroevolution is one species becomes another. That's what we just knew as evolution. Now they want to make it macro, micro.
Yes. So this is just survival of the fittest. So Darwin himself, he documented that. Now Darwin believed in evolution before he ever went to Galapagos. He already had that presupposition in his mind. He was already completely biased. He believed that God was an ancient myth that was no longer needed by mankind. So he already went with that bias. And so as a result of his observations, he posited that this also would be true. That this makes perfect sense. The finches got different sized beaks. Monkeys became men. He completely made that leap. Now, he did state in his book that he said, right now, we don't have all the evidence to be able to show this, but that he was sure in the next 100 years or so that science would discover the evidence to be able to fill in the missing link, the gaps between this. Science has never found any such thing, not even one little bit of it. Nothing. No more than what Darwin had, which was zero. Even though, I mean, if you look at that, I could see, I mean, could be some plausibility to that. I mean, it's not from a non-biblical point of view, just looking at it, it's like, okay. And this actually isn't illustrated real well. Like I mentioned the other day, now they have like 3D animations and stuff that you can actually see them morphing into it. So here's like another illustration, a little more artistic one of showing all the different, what they call different stages of human evolution.
Lucy over there.
Yeah. So it's completely, there is no evidence that they have ever discovered. So if they hold this theory, okay, that's one thing. They can hold the theory, but to present it, don't let them present it to you as fact because they have no evidence. They don't have any evidence of it. They just have a desire that it's true.
On a geekier level, sometimes they want to talk about, well, DNA, there are only so many things different between this and this species. And this, because designs are similar, it actually shows they have the same designer.
Right.
Like in the world of vehicles, there was a designer who was at Chevy who came out with that PT Cruiser. And, I'm sorry, that was over at
Chrysler.
That was
Chrysler. Then he went over to Chevy and brought the same concept and made the Chevy HHR, which is very similar in design to the PT Cruiser. It's the same designer. They look similar. They have similarity. The same designer made us, made monkeys, made all that we see. It's not evidence against him. It's evidence for him.
Right.
Well, so now,
Yes.
thanks for saying that, because one of the charges that we as Christians often say, it is a false thing, because the claim with an evolution is not that we came from monkeys. They say that we and monkeys had a similar origin. That line evolved into monkeys or the apes or whatever. We evolved into mankind. So we do got to be careful when we're making that charge. Well, why are there still monkeys? They're saying that was a separate line from us, that we had primate previous, that two separate lines came down. So we got to be careful with what we're answering. We don't want to make up a false house to burn down. So that's not one of their things. And while I'm at it with evolution, how many have heard of the thing creation versus evolution, right? Like that concept. That's not really a balanced idea because evolution doesn't talk about the origins of life. It talks about the origins of species. Life is already existing in the realm of evolution. They're saying, how do we get these differentiations? So it's not really a fair fight between creation and evolution in that sense. Again, so I was thinking through these things on a deeper level.
So where do things like Lucy fit into? Because if we don't believe in macroevolution,
Yeah.
but we do have things like Lucy that exist, where does she fit?
Lucy is a primate, not humanoid. Yeah, a lot of ask, where does someone like Lucy fit within the realm of this stuff? If we don't believe in macroevolution and one species can become another, what about things like Lucy? Lucy is a non-human primate. Lucy is essentially a monkey, right? And there are some great works on that type of stuff too, amongst, aside this plethora of apologetic books we have over here, there's ministries who are devoted to creation science and going into matters about various claims of Nebraska Man or Lucy or so on and so forth. And they hit it at a very deep level. So like Answers in Genesis or creation.com, which is Creation Ministries International. There are several good works. Their websites are great because it's free information. If you want to go delve deeper and buy their books and videos, they have them as well. But the answers, once again, are there. They're out there. We don't have time to get all that geeky right now, but the books do and the videos do. So the answers are there, but I'd be glad to talk about that more as well.
So that's thanks, Brian. So so when you're presented with something like this as evidence, when someone says, look at this, see, we came from apes, here's the evidence. This isn't evidence. This is a drawing. It's a picture. It's an artist's rendering. Same thing with the slide before that. So the question would be, okay, that looks very nice. Where is the evidence to show that this is accurate? And most people, the vast majority of people, they have never even considered that. They saw this in their third grade science book and their teacher told them that's true. And then that's what they've just believed ever since. They've never even thought twice about it. So sometimes it can be an opportunity to challenge them. So we always have to be careful not to think, aha, I got you. Where's the evidence? It's like to ask them, to make them question themselves. I never really thought about that. Just one more slide. Brian already mentioned this, the Grand Canyon, how it is generally thought to be millions of years. And as far as we know, there's nobody around now that was there when the Grand Canyon was formed, so they can't give testimony.
No one filmed it.
Right, yeah, nobody filmed it.
That we know.
Well, there was somebody, he had a book written about it.
He did write a book about it.
But nonetheless, people generally won't accept that as evidence. So there was nobody there to say, hey, no, that's not what happened. But there was a similar event that happened in the lifetime of some of the people in this room.
1980.
In 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted in northern Washington state. It was the largest volcanic eruption for the last 150 since Krakatoa, so in like 100 years or so. And it blew the mountain up and it destroyed a whole bunch of stuff and it formed a canyon. So if you can see a person down here, standing down there in the bottom. Yep. And then you see all those layers. And there's layers. So let me just read here. So there's layers up to 600 feet layers up to 600 feet of thickness when they're stacked of new strata have formed since 1980 at Mount St. Helens. These deposits accumulated from primary air blast, landslide, water wave, or on Spirit Lake, which was a lake that was right there at the volcano, pyroclastic flows, which are those big volcano clouds, mud flows, airfall, and steam water. Perhaps the most surprising accumulations of the pyroclastic flow deposits amassed from ground-hugging fluidized slurries of fine volcanic debris, mud essentially. that moved at high velocities off the north flank of the volcano. These deposits include fine pumice, ash, laminate beds from 1 millimeter thick to greater than 1 meter thick, each representing just a few seconds or several minutes of accumulation. So this all happened, this accumulated in a very short time. So this was a lot of force in a very short time. Is there a biblical event that we can think of that was a lot of force in a very short time? The flood.
Look,
The flood, yes.
that is a good hypothesis.
Yes. It certainly is a hypothesis that would be worth testing, experimenting, looking into. It should not be rejected out of hand. So this is evidence, while there may seem to be some plausibility that the Grand Canyon was formed over a long period of time with a little bit of water, there certainly are very plausible and alternate possibilities that also could account for it. And in general, most geologists and scientists that deal with those type things won't even consider it. They will actively try to suppress any real evidence that comes out to the contrary to prove their theories are wrong.
I'm glad that this happened in an area that's inhabited.
Yep.
And that the people are there to witness, to see, and science to see, because if this was an uninhabited area and this happened, and then scientists come upon it, they would be explaining this away as millions of years with all these layers, this deep canyon caused by some little creek once again.
Yep.
Just like it did. This is a mini Grand Canyon. This is testimony to the flood, just as the Grand Canyon is. But here we have eyewitnesses who saw this happen in moments,
Right.
not millions of years.
And or they might say that, well, those strata were already there from millions of years ago, and then just it got eroded away, so now we can see them. But no, we know that's not true. That's new ground that was not there. So those strata weren't like they were buried and then somehow it got etched away to reveal them. No, it's new ground.
Yeah, they all got carried, laid in layers with the weights of the various components being carried.
So those are some, again, as we said, there's a lot of stuff. So this stack here of books actually is, these are all from Answers in Genesis. These are little booklets. Brian gave this to me some years ago. Thanks. But they have, I mean, there's different ones. Like one is a pocket guide to ape men, for example. So what is science? A pocket guide to social issues, a pocket guide to global warming, Noah's Ark. So different things. These are just some of the resources. And most of this stuff is on their website too. So you don't even have to buy the books necessarily, although it's kind of all together. One thing that I did want to emphasize that we haven't really talked about during the workshops here because we just don't have time, but it kind of is underlying the entire idea of using evidence, trying to discover what's the truth, find the facts that are available, and then from an unbiased point of view, evaluate the facts and come to the correct conclusion. So to be able to do that, you need to be able to think logically. Logic is very important. So oftentimes we get taught what to think, not how to think. Kids in generations past were a lot smarter than kids are today. Sorry, they probably didn't hear that, so that's good. But so I really, really, really encourage you, all of you, adults and whatever, adults, if you have children, to introduce your children to it now, to ways to think logically, what logic means, what is a premise, what is all these things. It is so important to be able to learn how to think. Critical thinking, not what to think, but how to think. Because if you don't really know how to think, you only know what to think, then if somebody else comes along with something else you should think instead that seems more appealing, you have no real mechanism, no real way to figure out.
People they're learning this kind of like that of a parrot. Parrots don't really know what they're thinking when they're telling you words. They're just parroting what they hear. And unfortunately, that's how people often are. They're parroting what they hear. And what they're hearing in this culture is wickedness and lies that stand against the truth. So it's important that we get them to think critically. Kev?
I just wanted to mention that it's really hard to dispute the documentary of Gene Wilder and Pierre Boyle and Cloris Leachman.
Cloris
Frankenstein.
Well, yeah. So what's the name of that series? the series we were watching. We watched one.
Tactics.
No.
Which one?
No, the evidence of the flood and the
Patterns of evidence.
yeah
Patterns of evidence.
Patterns of evidence. Yes. So that's for those who aren't. There's several DVDs. Again, he tries to present different views and reasons why people have these views, and so he tried to present the facts, the evidence, in a way that you can evaluate it on your own.
Anything further today? Questions, comments?
All right, then we will close out with a prayer.